Maastricht, the southernmost city in the Netherlands, has a fascinating position in European history. The provincial capital of Limburg is located at an important crossing of the River Maas, and it has been fought over a lot. So many different layers of fortifications were built around the city over the centuries. While Maastricht had been besieged many times, the city was successfully taken by King Louis XIV and Vauban's French troops in 1674, but that battle resulted in a legendary casualty for the French. Count D'Artagnan was killed near this site, and there is now a statue of the famed musketeer who actually looms larger in fiction. Charles de Batz de Casimir D'Artagnan joined the famous King's Musketeers Company in the early 1630s. He was actually quite skilled in the art of espionage. Cardinal Mazarin entrusted him with various secret missions. Later, King Louis XIV also trusted him, and the Sun King tasked D'Artagnan with arresting the architect, Nicolas Fouquet, for designing the Chateau Vaux-le-Vicomte, a palace the Sun King thought was more beautiful than his, so of course the architect deserved life imprisonment. By 1667, D'Artagnan was a captain of the Musketeers, but during the siege of Maastricht ended up with a musket ball through his throat and was killed right at this spot outside the wall on June 25th, 1673. Now, D'Artagnan became famous because in the 19th century, the novelist Alexandre Dumas made him the central character of his famed Three Musketeers story. He also made an offshoot of romance novels involving D'Artagnan. There is even a 2023 movie about him, so he is very well known through fictionalized accounts of his life. There had been a small statue of D'Artagnan at this site since the 1970s, however the Petit Musketeer got stolen, but the pedestal is still here, so after that was lost they did build a full-scale statue of D'Artagnan closer to the site of his death. The Bastion Waldeck here is a star-shaped fort originally built in 1690. In the decades following the siege, Maastricht's fortifications were totally revamped by altering them based on Vauban's custom plans. The Marquis de Vauban is considered as one of the greatest military engineers and architects of all time. The French did succeed in taking Maastricht within 13 days, due to the master planning and direct involvement of the Marquis de Vauban. On the Port Saint-Denis in Paris, it reads to Louis the Great for capturing Maastricht in 13 days. The French were fighting in this area around the 14th century wall, focused on taking the Tongersport Gate, which no longer stands. D'Artagnan, who was leading the White Musketeers, was apparently shot and killed almost immediately after he entered the crescent outside of this wall. Maastricht has many layers of fortifications that were built through the centuries, and a lot of them were destroyed in the 19th century. However, scattered remnants survive around the city, so we'll explore a few more locations. We're now heading through the Porte Verachtig, a neo-Gothic gate built into the wall in the late 19th century. This is actually the first medieval city wall of Maastricht, still partially standing in the Jakerkwartier. Unlike the gate that D'Artagnan was after, the original city gate called the Helpoort still stands. It was built around 1229 and is the oldest surviving city gate in the Netherlands. This national monument is now home to the Vesting Museum, a museum about the fortifications, but I did not have time to go in there. That is the Pater Vinktoren, a rampart tower of the second medieval wall built in 1370. This is the inside of the medieval city wall on the Langgratia. And this is pretty cool as they show in the bricks of that building across the street where the medieval wall used to continue on. There's a bridge to nowhere. I am now walking along the Lage Fronten, which was originally built in the 17th century. However, this was significantly altered by the early 19th century. Most of this layer of large fortifications on the western bank of the River Maas were destroyed, but there is this really awesome and little known stretch of outerworks that can still be explored today. While Maastricht is now firmly a part of the Netherlands, the Dutch only captured the city for the first time in 1632. As we saw, the city was captured for a while by the French in 1673, but then it was recaptured by the Dutch. Later on in 1748, the French sieged and took Maastricht again during the War of the Austrian Succession, though it was soon returned to the Dutch. But then the French came back in a failed 1793 attempt to take the city, but tried again in 1794 and succeeded. They ended up occupying the city for about a 20-year period. Under Napoleon's rule, Maastricht was considered to be as part of mainland France, while the rest of the Netherlands was ruled by Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. But in 1815, Maastricht was fully incorporated back into the Netherlands. These advanced new fortifications were built after Prince Frederick Henry of Orange took Maastricht in 1632, so later on they were redeveloped into Vauban-style fortifications. That's what largely still stands today. This labyrinth of high fronts is now a public park, and it's a really great area to explore. This is Fort Sint-Pieter, the largest fortress of Maastricht. This strategic location was the site of the Iron City, a supposedly impregnable fortress that survived many attacks, until 1673. This was approximately the location where the French broke through the walls, and then proceeded to sack Maastricht. So this is perhaps the best example of the post-Vauban fortress renovations around the turn of the 18th century. This site was turned into a massive and towering hexagonal fortress, but it only ever experienced one battle, as the revolutionary French forces attacked the fort in 1794. While they did take Maastricht and start a 20-year occupation until 1814, this fort technically survived the siege. It is possible to go inside and visit this fort, but it's on a guided tour basis only, and I was not able to catch a tour on this trip. Now we are on the outskirts of Maastricht, near the slopes of Mount Sint-Pieter, known locally as St. Petersburg, which is one of the highest points in the Netherlands. It's not really a mountain, it's more of a plateau, reaching a maximum height of 171 meters, 561 feet, so it's not all that high. But Mount St. Peter has a fascinating history and lots of interesting little sights to see. This is the Chateau Neercanne, a magnificent castle built in 1698 by the Lord of Neercanne, who was the military governor of Maastricht at the time. This is quite the historic castle, as the Russian Tsar Peter the Great stayed here during his visit to Maastricht. The young Tsar visited Maastricht in July of 1717 as part of his tour observing Western European architecture, culture, and specifically militaries. He was especially interested in fortress planning, so he came to Maastricht to study the extremely advanced fortifications of the city, rebuilt based on Vauban's plans after the French siege in 1674. He was planning a modernization, aka westernization, of Russia during this time, and he learned a lot from his visit to Maastricht and other locations that are evident in Russia's military, civic, and even religious constructions throughout the Tsar's reign. He also visited Amsterdam on this trip, which was definitely a big inspiration for his new capital, St. Petersburg. This castle is wonderfully preserved with a fantastic Baroque garden. Also, it is believed that Julius Caesar defeated the Belgica tribes and completed his conquest of Gaul right here in the Yaker Valley in this general vicinity. Chateau Neercanne is now a Michelin-starred restaurant. It seems really nice. Back directly behind the castle, there is an entrance to the caves. So there is a colossal network of artificial caves under Mount Sint-Pieter. They were formed by many limestone quarries around Mount Sint-Pieter, so there are now over 8,000 different lime tunnels going all over the place. When the Maastricht Treaty establishing the European Union was signed here in Maastricht on February 7th, 1992, all the signers came here for a fancy dinner at the castle, and they all signed a wall inside the cave. Just down the road within view of Chateau Neercanne is the border with Belgium. We have now entered the little village of Caen, Belgium. And at this marker, I am standing in 2 countries at once, which is fun. Actually, here in Limburg, there is a country tri-point called the Dreilandenpunt between Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. This cave entrance right on the Belgian border was converted into the NATO headquarters Canterbury and Joint Operations Center in the 1950s. This ultra-secret installation was intended to be a temporary site only for war use, but by the 60s became a permanent peacetime headquarters. There were usually about 400 Dutch, Belgian, German, English, and American soldiers stationed here until 1993. There is a guard mannequin inside the former guardhouse. Apparently the NATO Operations Center is still intact in there, so that would be interesting to see. Now we are driving along the Via Belgica. This was an important ancient Roman road. The Via Belgica starts in Cologne, Germany at the Rhine River, then traverses across the Low Countries, into South Limburg first, through the heart of Old Maastricht, then crosses into Belgium at about this point, then it continues on to Boulogne-sur-Mer, France, on the Atlantic coast. I've stopped inside a local bakery. They sell a wide variety of fresh bread and pastries. All of this looks really good. Maastricht is well known for vlaai. These sweet tart pies are a local Limburgish delicacy. I also went into an older meat shop and butchery, which has some fantastic stained glass windows of animals whose meat they sell here. They also sell cave cheese. Cheese that was stored in Maastricht's caves. And I did have the opportunity to enjoy a glorious traditional Dutch weekend breakfast. It consists of using fresh rolls from the bakery and then putting meat and cheese on them, which is pretty common throughout Central Europe. I even got to try the Groton cheese. Cheese does taste better once it's been in a cave, but this is more unique. It's a very serious breakfast specialty throughout the Netherlands, where you slather butter on a roll and then dump chocolate sprinkles on it. It is honestly amazing, but you're only allowed to eat it on the weekends. Back in Maastricht, this is the castle of André Rieu. He is a world-renowned violinist and conductor, leader of the Johann Strauss Orchestra, and considered as the modern-day waltz king. He is from Maastricht and lives in this amazing historic castle on the slopes of the mountain. We will do a little more exploring here at one of the highest elevations in the country. This is the entrance to the Lord Grotto of St. Peter. It is a really interesting man-made grotto, intended to be reminiscent of the famous grotto in Lourdes, France. This was built sometime between 1880 and 1890, and is probably the oldest Lourdes grotto replica in the Netherlands. These can be found across the Western world. This was built by local monks from the Church of St. Peter, using flint boulders that they found in the bountiful quarries on St. Petersburg. That is really fantastic stonework. What a hidden gem. There are some interesting ex voto plaques on this wall, including one of a foot. This sign points us to the Way of St. James, terminating at Santiago de Compostela. At the end of the road is the Grand Café Buitenhoed Slavante, a wonderful restaurant in an 1847 structure on the slopes of Mount Sint-Pieter. There's an old photograph of the entrance to the Lord Grotto just down the slope. This is a meeting point for tours of the Grotten Zonenberg, a portion of the caves that are open to the public. Unfortunately, I did not have time to do any of the cave tours, but I hear the tunnels are pretty interesting. During World War II, artwork from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, including Rembrandt's Night Watch, was hidden inside the caves from the Germans. However, it turns out they probably knew that the art was here, but left it since it was a safe place during wartime. This is St. Anthony's Chapel, a little chapel built in 1681. It was constructed of the marl stone quarried here on St. Petersburg. These are the remains of a cave house built into the slope of the mountain. These cave houses were fairly common, as poor people would build them out of stone from the plentiful marl quarries around Mount Sint-Pieter. A woman named Hricha lived in this cave house from her youth until she died in 1971. There was no water, electricity, or gas here. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the fascinating military history of Maastricht and some other off the beaten path sites around this unique city. It is a really great place to explore. I would definitely recommend visiting Maastricht if you can. Again, they do several tours of the underground tunnels, aka caves. If you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Also take a look at my other Maastricht videos linked in the description, and I want to give a special shout out to my friends for showing me around these really interesting locations. Thanks for watching!